In April 2020, law enforcement in Norfolk, England, raided the private residence of one of Britain's most prolific online child sex offenders, David Wilson.
The name David Wilson might not be widely known, but for his victims and their families, it evokes a lifetime of trauma and humiliation. To satisfy his disgusting sexual need, he blackmailed little boys into sending explicit images, performing acts according to his hideous desire. David's tactic of preying on young boys was both sinister and meticulously planned, allowing him to evade justice for years. By the time authorities finally caught up with him, over 500 innocent lives had already been shattered in ways too horrific to comprehend. Today we are diving into one of the most disturbing child predator cases, exploring the long and complex investigation of David Wilson. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to stay updated on our latest true crime stories.
David Wilson was born in the United Kingdom and raised in a small, quiet town in Norfolk. Little is known about his childhood, but he continued living with his mother well into adulthood in a home she owned. As an adult, he worked as a roofer and was involved in children's football, a role that put him in close contact with young boys and placed him in a position of trust. But beneath his normal life, David harbored a sickening secret. He was a prolific pedophile. Between 2016 and 2020, David created dozens of catfish social media profiles. He would steal photos of teenage girls and carefully construct these profiles to appear genuine and believable. To stay under the radar, David Wilson bought second-hand prepaid phones, using a different one for each victim. He posed as an attractive teenage girl and messaged young boys, knowing they would be instantly drawn in. Then, he started with casual conversations, slowly building a connection. Little by little, David steered the chats into flirtation, making the boys feel special and gaining their trust along the way. David was selective in choosing his victim. He didn't message random boys, but meticulously targeted young, impressionable, and vulnerable individuals, typically between the ages of 11 and 15. Once he was confident his victim had fallen into his carefully crafted trap, he would gradually turn the conversation toward sexual topics. When he had the boys feeling comfortable sexting with him, he would ask them to send explicit images of themselves, either fully naked or focused on a specific body part. If a victim hesitated or seemed too shy to comply, David would send a collected photo of a teenage girl first to encourage them to do the same. Most of his victims were too young and naive to grasp the danger of the situation. Eventually, they made the tragic mistake of sending him a photo. That was when the real nightmare began. Once he had that first image, he pushed for more, each request becoming more inappropriate than the last. He knew the boys would do anything to keep their secret hidden, and with more photos in his possession, it became easier for him to make unthinkable commands, far more disturbing than just sending nude. He would push the young boys to send photos of them touching themselves, but that wasn't even the worst of it. If the victim had a younger sibling, which sometimes happened, David would force them to perform sexual acts on their own siblings, film it, and send it to him. Imagine the horror those boys faced, believing they had no choice but to obey. Most were just 11 to 15 years old, but some were even younger, all groomed and trapped through social media, too terrified to confide in family or friends. They all felt utterly alone, stuck in a vicious cycle that never seemed to end. The only thing that changed was the level of depravity David demanded. It grew worse and worse over time, as his sick appetite for control and pleasure knew no limits. And here's the worst part. The youngest victim of David was only 4 years old. David was a master manipulator, and his cruelty knew no limits. Over and over again, his victims begged him to stop, but he didn't care. Many of these boys were pushed to their breaking point, spiraling into deep depression and crippling anxiety. Some were so mentally shattered, they felt like there was no way out, that the only escape was to end their own lives. Some even confessed to David how terrified and broken they were, but he didn't care. Instead, he pushed them even further into despair, showing no remorse for the pain and trauma he caused. From 2016 to 2020, David didn't just prey on victims in the UK, he expanded his reach, targeting boys as far away as the US. He operated with cold, calculated precision, juggling around 15 fake social media accounts while cycling through about 5 prepaid phones at a time. This web of anonymity made it nearly impossible for victims to track him down. And even if they reported him to the police, it didn't matter. Wilson was always one step ahead, slipping through the cracks again and again.
What you've learned so far is enough to outrage anyone. But the worst part? For years the police were well aware of David's sick crimes, yet they couldn't stop him. No matter how hard they tried, they lacked the solid evidence needed to lock him up. And so, he kept going, destroying more lives along the way. It wasn't until April 4, 2015, that David Wilson was first arrested for possessing indecent images of children. During the arrest, authorities searched his home and seized electronic devices. However, despite their efforts, they struggled to directly link him to broader criminal activities due to a lack of solid evidence. Wilson had expertly covered his digital tracks, making it difficult to build a strong case against him. Without a strong case, authorities had no choice but to release him. Once he walked free, he continued his crimes without hesitation, completely unfazed by the fact that he was now on the police's radar. However, the severity of his alleged crimes raised serious red flags. His employers and the football association where he worked were notified. Police reports revealed particular concern over his involvement in children's football, leading to his removal from the role. But losing his position did little to stop him from continuing his sick behavior. As David's online activities grew more brazen, the National Crime Agency, NCA, the UK's leading force against organized crime, cybercrime, and trafficking, stepped in. By 2016, he still continued using fake profiles to lure young boys, posing as a teenage girl to gain their trust. But technology was closing in on him. Facebook's algorithm scans messages for suspicious activity, tracking who sends what and to whom. In 2017, David's accounts triggered an alert. Facebook flagged multiple conversations where boys had sent explicit images to a fake teenage girl. Facebook shared this data with the NCA, revealing 20 accounts linked to victims. Investigators traced the IP addresses back to a property owned by Wilson's mother. They also uncovered CCTV footage of Wilson buying a top-up voucher for a mobile phone tied to one of his fake accounts. With this evidence, the NCA arrested David Wilson again in August 2017. A key piece of the puzzle, a mobile phone used in his crimes, was discovered hidden in his bedroom. Yet, once again, he was released. It's unclear why he wasn't charged at the time, but it was likely due to the difficulty of proving that the fake accounts undeniably belonged to David and were directly linked to the phone authorities had found. Without solid evidence to secure a conviction, he was free to continue his spree again. David was flagged multiple times on his social media accounts and even arrested on several occasions. However, each time, the police struggled to build a strong enough case to put him behind bars for good. Investigators later admitted they needed time to dig deeper into David's Snapchat, Google, and Instagram accounts. Only then they could gather enough evidence to bring him down. At the time, they had no idea just how widespread his crimes truly were. Since these platforms were based in the United States, UK authorities had to file an international data request, a process that dragged on for nearly 2 years. When the National Crime Agency, NCA, finally received the information, the horrifying truth was revealed. They weren't just tracking a predator. They had uncovered one of the most prolific cybercriminals in British history. After years of relentless investigation, police finally gathered enough evidence to arrest and charge David Wilson. In April 2020, they stormed his house and caught him red-handed as he desperately tried to flush his mobile phone down the toilet. Once the police had him in handcuffs, they read him the caution statement and listed the charges against him, finally bringing his reign of terror to an end.
As of this moment, okay, you are under arrest for the following offences. I need you to listen to the offences, okay? I'm going to go through them. Right. Causing or inciting a child under 13 years of age to engage in causing or inciting a child to engage in blackmail, making and distribution of indecent images, and the possession of indecent images of children. Do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Okay, David, the grounds for this are that we're in possession of material that shows that accounts controlled by you, David Wilson, are involved in the commission of the offences for which I've just arrested you for. Okay? This arrest is necessary for a number of reasons. To protect children or other vulnerable persons from you, to allow the prompt and effective investigation of the offences, okay, by means of recorded interview where special warnings may be delivered to you, okay, and to preserve evidence that we believe that you may attempt to destroy or hide if you're not arrested. Okay? Do you understand? Yeah.
David Wilson was arrested 3 times over the course of a 3-year investigation, yet each time he was released, he went back to offending, escalating his crimes with every arrest. This raised serious questions. How did he get away with it for so long? How was he able to destroy so many lives before finally being stopped? An NCA spokesperson later explained why it took years to bring him to justice. We weren't in a position to charge him before 2020. We applied for bail conditions, but we can't monitor someone 24/7. Wilson was relentless. We did everything we could. But when you're dealing with a criminal who hides behind fake identities, we have to be absolutely certain that the person we arrest is the one behind those accounts. Building that kind of case takes time. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle.
Though David Wilson was finally arrested and facing charges, the fight to lock him up behind bars was far from over. Investigators faced the grueling task of sifting through an overwhelming mountain of evidence, over 250,000 messages, and a vast collection of disturbing images. The sheer magnitude of what they had to review was unimaginable, a chilling reminder of the horrors Wilson inflicted on his victims. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Wilson's victims were spread across the UK, the US, and Australia. He had attempted to contact 5,000 young boys and successfully manipulated 500 into his trap. Finally, justice caught up with him. In November 2020, Wilson appeared before Ipswich Crown Court, where he admitted to 96 offenses. His confession sped up the trial, allowing investigators to focus on sentencing rather than proving his guilt. As the court proceedings unfolded, harrowing victim statements revealed the true extent of Wilson's crimes. One victim described how he was only 11 years old when he was tricked into Wilson's sick game. He explained, "The girl approached me in a way that felt normal. She seemed like someone my age, someone I could talk to. I had no reason to doubt she was real. He took advantage of my youth and innocence. He just wanted more and more images, no matter what it did to me." The victim's mother broke down in court, overcome with guilt. She told the judge, "I failed to protect my child from the monster who preyed on him. I couldn't keep him safe." More victims came forward, each story as soul-crushing as the last, revealing David Wilson's true depravity and the devastating harm he had inflicted on so many innocent lives. One young boy was being groomed while grieving the loss of his father to cancer. Already struggling with deep emotional pain, he was easy prey for Wilson, who pushed him further into depression with constant demands for explicit material. Another victim had just lost his grandfather when Wilson found him. The fake girl seemed like a comforting presence at first, but soon the chats took a dark turn. After sending a single image, he found himself trapped in a cycle of blackmail and harassment. I begged him to stop. I told him my grandfather had just died. I told him things were already too hard, but he didn't care. He just wanted more. Then came a moment that stunned the courtroom. A brave young boy stared directly at Wilson and said, "Do you remember me? I was the little boy who played striker. I was 9 years old. I was the top scorer. I was the kid you blackmailed, the kid you made feel worthless. I am the child whose childhood you stole." The horror didn't end there. The court learned that David had forced some victims to commit unthinkable acts on their own siblings, a revelation that left everyone in the room visibly shaken. Because David Wilson pleaded guilty, a full trial was avoided, but the sheer level of evil in his crimes left many questioning whether he could ever be rehabilitated. One investigator who worked on the case later reflected on David Wilson's behavior, describing him as a man consumed by his sick, pedophilic disorder. He explained that Wilson's actions were not just calculated but compulsive, comparing his escalating offenses to a dangerous addiction. Over time, his need for control and exploitation grew stronger, pushing him to take greater risks and commit even more heinous acts. With each new victim, he became bolder, more manipulative, and increasingly dangerous. When David Wilson finally stood before Judge Rupert Overbury, it was clear that this was no ordinary criminal. He condemned David Wilson for orchestrating a long, premeditated campaign of sadistic manipulation, emphasizing that any decent human being would be appalled by the sheer horror of his crimes. Looking Wilson in the eye, he made it clear, "You are a serial predator. You are an extremely dangerous individual." On February 10, 2021, David Wilson was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with an additional 8 years on extended license, meaning he will be closely monitored after release. After the sentence, investigators described Wilson as one of the most prolific offenders they had ever encountered. His lack of remorse and utter disregard for his victims left no doubt. David Wilson was pure evil. Even with David Wilson locked away, the full scope of his crimes remains a disturbing mystery. The sheer horror of what he forced his victims to endure was so extreme that some details were considered too graphic to be made public. There are likely more victims who never came forward, and some of his most heinous acts may never be fully revealed. Perhaps, for the sake of those who suffered, it is better that some truths remain hidden. Yet one undeniable truth lingers: the scars he left behind will never fully heal. For many, the harsh sentence was a rare victory, as even some murderers receive lighter punishments in the UK. However, many believed his sentence was too lenient, arguing that Wilson should never be allowed back into society. Some even felt that only a death sentence could truly ensure he never harmed anyone again, fearing that if he were ever released, history would repeat itself. The internet has opened up a world of opportunity, providing instant access to information and connecting people across the globe. It has shaped the modern world in many positive ways. But with these benefits come hidden dangers, and David Wilson's case is just one example. While his crimes were particularly extreme, he is far from alone. Countless predators like him lurk online, preying on the vulnerable without remorse. This case serves as a warning to society, urging us to do everything possible to keep children safe online. David Wilson is now behind bars, recognized as one of the most prolific online predators in British history. But the damage he inflicted can never be undone. His victims continue to receive mental health support, yet for some, especially those subjected to his most horrific forms of blackmail, full recovery may never be possible. However, amid the horror of David Wilson's crimes, the bravery of his victims who chose to come forward in court stood as a glimmer of hope. Many of them were just children, and they spoke out, even though it meant reliving their trauma in front of strangers, investigators, and the man who had manipulated and tormented them. For children and young teens, carrying such an emotional burden is unimaginable. Many victims of abuse never speak out, too overwhelmed by fear, shame, and trauma. Yet these brave individuals found the strength to confront their abuser and fight for justice. When the juries reached their verdict, those boys were no longer David Wilson's victims. They had become survivors, incredibly brave and resilient. That brings us to the end of today's episode. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe David Wilson deserved a harsher sentence? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.